A 6-year-old beggar girl enters a luxury toy store, approaches the counter, and holds up a crumpled $20 bill. With a child's innocence, she says to the owner, "Sir, I want to buy a daddy." The man, who is actually a millionaire, is completely speechless and thinks it's just a joke. He explains to the child that this is just a toy store, but the girl insists she doesn't want to buy toys. When she explains the reason, the millionaire can't handle the child's answer and starts crying right there. What happens next is shocking. The golden October afternoon painted the shop windows of Fifth Avenue in warm hues. But inside Wonderland Toys, Manhattan's most luxurious toy store, the air conditioning maintained a perfect climate for its discerning clientele. Alexander Whitmore was adjusting the final details of a miniature train display when he heard the gentle chime of the front door. At 42, Alexander had built an empire from a small shop inherited from his grandfather. His impeccable appearance, bespoke Italian suit, perfectly coiffed graying hair, and leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, reflected the success he had achieved. Every gesture was calculated, every word weighed, every decision based on numbers and tangible results. When he turned to greet what he assumed was another customer searching for the perfect gift, his blue eyes met something entirely unexpected. A little girl, about 6 years old, stood near the entrance, her dirty, torn clothes a stark contrast to the sophisticated surroundings. Her brown hair was matted, her small face smudged with grime, but her brown eyes shone with a determination that startled him. Alexander hesitated for a moment, his pragmatic mind trying to process the situation. Unaccompanied children were not common in his store, especially not children in such a state. His business instincts warned him of potential trouble, outraged parents, accusations of negligence, or simply the discomfort of other important clients. The girl began to walk toward him with small but resolute steps, leaving dirty footprints on the polished marble floor that had cost a fortune to import from Italy. She was clutching something tightly in her right hand, and Alexander could see it was a crumpled bill. "Excuse me, mister," she said, her voice sweet but determined, interrupting his thoughts. "Do you work here?" Alexander looked down to meet those hopeful eyes. There was something in that dirty little face that touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the seriousness with which she regarded him, or the way she held that bill as if it were her most precious possession. "Yes, I do," he replied, his voice softening instinctively. "In fact, I own this store. How can I help you?" The girl took a deep breath, as if preparing for the most important moment of her life. She extended her small, grimy hand, revealing a crumpled $20 bill that looked like it had been through many hands and situations. "Sir," she said with all the sincerity in the world, "I want to buy a daddy." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander felt as though the floor had shifted beneath his feet. In all his years of business, dealing with the most extravagant requests from millionaire clients, he had never faced a request that left him so utterly speechless. He blinked several times, trying to process what he had just heard. His analytical mind searched for a logical explanation. Perhaps she was looking for a doll, a toy that represented a father figure. But there was something in the way she had said those words, in the gravity of her expression, that told him this was no simple childhood confusion. A daddy," he repeated slowly, still struggling to understand. The girl nodded vigorously, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes, sir, I have $20 here. Is it enough?" Alexander glanced around his luxurious store, filled with toys that cost hundreds or thousands of dollars, and suddenly felt completely lost. How could he explain to this child that what she was seeking was not for sale? Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture that betrayed his usual composure. For years, he had faced complex negotiations, financial crises, and decisions involving millions of dollars. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The girl was still there, standing before him with her $20 bill extended, waiting. For an answer he simply didn't know how to give. "Sweetheart," he began, crouching down to her level, "this is a toy store. We sell dolls, cars, games." He paused, searching for the right words. "We don't sell people." The girl's expression shifted subtly. It wasn't disappointment. It was something deeper, as if she had expected this answer, but still clung to a stubborn hope. She looked around the store at the shelves filled with colorful toys, the carefully arranged displays, the lights that made everything sparkle like a fairy tale. "No, mister," she said with a conviction that surprised him. "You sell daddies here too, because every time I'm on the street asking for money, I see kids leaving here happy with their dads. Since I don't have one, I came to buy mine too." The words hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. He stood up slowly, feeling a tightness in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. The child's logic was devastatingly simple, and at the same time broke his heart in a way he couldn't comprehend. She had watched other children, leaving his store with their fathers, seen the joy on their faces, the held hands, the warm embraces, and concluded that this was the place where one bought family happiness. For a child living on the streets, that connection made perfect sense. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Alexander asked, his voice softer than he intended. "Sophia," she replied, tucking the bill into the torn pocket of her dirty dress. "And you?" "Alexander. But you can call me Mr. Alex if you'd like." He hesitated, unaccustomed to such direct, informal interactions. Sophia smiled for the first time since she had entered the store, and Alexander felt something strange happen in his chest. It had been so long since he had seen a genuine smile, one devoid of ulterior motives or business interests. The smiles in his world always came with contracts to sign or favors to ask. "Mr. Alex," Sophia said, "do you have any kids?" The question, it caught him off guard. "No, I don't have any children." Why not? The simplicity of the question disarmed him completely. How could he explain to a 6-year-old about all-consuming careers, superficial relationships based on convenience, or the unconscious fear of becoming vulnerable through paternal love? "It's complicated," was all he could manage. Sophia stared at him with those big, intelligent eyes. "My mommy left when I was really little. I don't remember her much, and I never had a daddy. Do you think that's why she left? Because I didn't have a daddy to take care of us." Alexander felt the ground shift beneath his feet again. The raw vulnerability of this child, the way she tried to find logic in a situation likely beyond her comprehension, touched a part of him he had kept carefully guarded for decades. "Sophia, it wasn't your fault," he said firmly. "Sometimes adults make decisions that have nothing to do with children. You did nothing wrong." She nodded, but Alexander could see that his words couldn't erase years of questions that a child so young should never have to carry. "So," Sophia said, returning to the original topic with the persistence typical of a child, "can you sell me a daddy or not? I can get more money if $20 isn't enough. I know a dumpster that's always got cans." The determination in her voice broke something inside Alexander. This little girl was willing to dig through trash for more money, in the hope of buying something he knew was impossible to sell. And he had no idea how to explain it without completely destroying the hope that shone in her brown eyes. Alexander walked to one of the nearest display cases, trying to buy time to organize his thoughts. His eyes scanned the carefully arranged toys, dolls that cost more than many people earned in a month, remote-controlled cars imported from Germany, dollhouses that were perfect replicas of real mansions. Everything here represented the luxury and sophistication he had built over the years, but nothing seemed appropriate for this extraordinary situation. He picked up a porcelain doll with a hand-embroidered silk dress, one of the most expensive items in the store. Perhaps, he thought, if he offered her something truly special, he could distract Sophia from her impossible request. It was a strategy that had always worked in the business world. When you can't give the client exactly what they want, you offer something even better. "Sophia," he said, turning back to the girl with the doll in his hands, "what if I gave you this doll as a gift? She's very special. She comes from France, and she has dresses you can change." Sophia looked at the doll with a politeness that surprised Alexander. She examined the delicate porcelain face, gently touched the curly blonde hair, and admired the light blue dress with its intricate lace. For a moment, he thought he had resolved the situation. "She's very pretty, Mr. Alex," Sophia said finally, "but I didn't come here to buy a doll." "But it would be a gift," Alexander insisted, feeling a strange urgency to make this child smile. "You wouldn't have to pay anything." Sophia shook her head with a determination that seemed disproportionate to her age. "You can keep the money, sir. I really came to buy a daddy." The girl's categorical refusal left Alexander momentarily speechless. In his world, money solved everything. Business problems, legal issues, complicated relationships, there was always a price that made things simpler. But here was a 6-year-old, clearly living in poverty, refusing an expensive gift because it wasn't what she truly wanted. He carefully placed the doll back in the display case, his movements slower than usual. There was something profoundly humbling in discovering that his usual solution, buying his way out of difficult situations, was completely useless right now. "Sophia," he tried again, crouching to her level, "I understand you want a father, but people aren't things you can buy in a store. A dad is someone who takes care of you, who loves you, who is always there when you need him." "I know that," Sophia replied with a seriousness that unnerved him. "That's why I want to buy one, so he can take care of me and love me." Alexander felt a tightness in his chest. The girl's logic was irrefutable within her small world. If she could buy a father, he would naturally do all the things fathers do. It was a simple equation in her childish mind, and he didn't know how to explain that love didn't work like a commercial transaction. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "I can't sell you a father. Not because I don't want to, but because it's just not possible. Fathers aren't merchandise." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she fought bravely to keep them from falling. Alexander saw the exact moment hope began to fade from those brown eyes, and it felt like watching something precious being destroyed right in front of him. So I'm never going to have a daddy?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Question echoed through the luxurious store like a silent scream of pain. Alexander opened his mouth to answer, but the words just wouldn't come. How could he promise something that was out of his control? How could he offer hope without creating unrealistic expectations? Sophia lowered her head, tucked the crumpled bill back into her pocket, and walked slowly toward the door. Each step she took seemed to echo in Alexander's heart like an accusation. For the first time in his adult life, he felt completely powerless in a situation, unable to find a solution that made sense to both him and this extraordinary child. When Sophia reached the door, she turned one last time. "Thanks anyway, Mr. Alex. You were nice to me." And then she was gone, leaving Alexander alone in his perfect store, surrounded by thousands of expensive toys, yet feeling emptier than he had ever felt in his life. The hours following Sophia's departure were the longest of Alexander's professional life. He tried to resume his normal activities, reviewing sales reports, approving new products for the Christmas season, returning calls from international suppliers, but his mind kept returning to that little girl with brown eyes and a dirty dress. Mrs. Henderson, his assistant of 15 years, noticed his distraction immediately. She was a shrewd woman of 58 who had learned to read Alexander's moods better than any instruction manual. When he paced past the same display case for the third time without really seeing it, she decided to intervene. "Mr. Whitmore," she said gently, "did something happen today? You seem troubled." Alexander stopped pacing and looked at his assistant. Mrs. Henderson had known him since the early days of his business expansion, had witnessed his victories and defeats, but had never seen him in this state of quiet turmoil. "A child was here today," he said finally. "A little girl, all alone. She wanted to buy a father." Mrs. Henderson blinked several times, processing the information. "Buy a father? Sir, I don't understand." Alexander recounted the entire story. Sophia's unusual request, her refusal of the expensive gift, the devastatingly simple logic behind her wish. As he spoke, he realized that reliving those moments brought back the same tightness in his chest he had felt during their conversation. "Where is she now?" Mrs. Henderson asked when he finished. "I don't know. She left. She just left. Looking so dejected, and I didn't know what to do." Mrs. Henderson watched him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. There was something in her eyes that seemed to mix understanding with a dose of maternal reproach. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "may I ask you a personal question?" Alexander hesitated. Personal conversations were not part of his work routine, but something about that afternoon had broken many of his usual rules. "Of course. What did you feel when she walked out that door?" The question caught him completely off guard. He opened his mouth to give an automatic response. Something about feeling pity for the child's situation or frustration at not being able to help, but the words wouldn't come. What he had felt was far more complex and unsettling. "I felt empty," he admitted finally, "as if something important had walked out of my life, even though she was only here for a few minutes." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "You know, sir, in all the years I've worked here, I've seen a lot of children come and go. Most of them come with parents who barely pay attention to them, too busy with their phones or their important conversations. They get the most expensive toys, but they rarely seem truly happy." Alexander listened with growing attention. "But every once in a while," she continued, "a different kind of child comes along. One who doesn't just want toys, but connection, love, genuine attention. And those children, well, they remind us of things we forget when we grow up." "Like what?" "Like the fact that money can't buy the things that really matter. Like the fact that sometimes the most valuable thing we can offer someone is our time and our presence." Mrs. Henderson paused. "And like the fact that some encounters happen for a reason." Alexander felt a shiver run down his spine. "Do you think I should look for her?" "I can't answer that for you, sir. But I can tell you that in my life, I've learned that regrets over the things we didn't do hurt a lot more than regrets over the things we did." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of reflection. Alexander tried to focus on work, but the image of Sophia, her hopeful eyes turning to disappointment, the way she had thanked him even after being rejected, kept replaying in his mind. By the time he was ready to close the store, he had made a decision. He couldn't stop thinking about the little girl alone on the streets of New York, with no place to sleep, no one to care for her. The thought that she might be hungry, cold, or worse, in danger, tormented him in a way he couldn't explain. For the first time in years, Alexander left the store before finishing all his administrative tasks. There was something more important to do, even if he didn't know exactly what it was. Alexander walked the bustling streets of Manhattan with a purpose he couldn't clearly define. His stride was faster than usual, his eyes scanning every corner, every building entrance, every small space where a lone child might take shelter. The New York autumn was already showing its first signs of severity, and the sharp wind blowing in from the Hudson made him pull his Italian coat tighter. For 40 minutes, he searched without success. He asked street vendors, doormen, even other homeless people, but no one had seen a small girl on her own. With each negative response, the tightness in his chest intensified. New York was an immense city, and a child could disappear into its urban labyrinth like a drop in the ocean. Just as he was about to give up, he decided to walk back down the street where his store was located. Maybe Sophia had returned. Maybe she was still nearby. It was a faint hope, but it was all he had. And then he saw her. Sophia was sitting on the sidewalk across the street, huddled against the brick wall of an old building. She had pulled her legs up to her chest and rested her head on her knees, making herself into a tiny human ball. Even from a distance, Alexander could see she was shivering, whether from cold, hunger, or a combination of both. He couldn't tell. Something broke inside him, seeing her in that state of absolute vulnerability. All his adult life, he had shielded himself from this kind of emotional turmoil. In the business world, excessive compassion was seen as a weakness, and he had learned to keep his emotions under strict control. But there, in front of that lonely, helpless child, all his defenses crumbled instantly. He crossed the street without even looking at the traffic, ignoring the angry honks of drivers. As he approached Sophia, she slowly lifted her head, and he saw her eyes were red, whether from crying or the cold wind, he couldn't say. "Sophia," he called softly, crouching a few feet away so as not to startle her. She recognized him immediately, and for a brief moment, her eyes lit up. But the sadness quickly returned, as if she remembered he didn't have what she was looking for. "Hi, Mr. Alex," she said, her voice small and hoarse. "What are you doing here? Where are you going to sleep tonight?" Sophia shrugged, a gesture that seemed too big for someone so small. "Don't know yet. Sometimes I sleep in the park, sometimes under the bank's awning. Depends on where there aren't too many people." The casual way she described her state of abandonment was like a punch to Alexander's stomach. This child had normalized a life no child should ever know. She spoke of sleeping in the open as other children might speak of choosing which toy to take to bed. "Are you hungry?" he asked, noticing how she seemed even smaller than when she had been in his store. Sophia hesitated before answering, as if admitting hunger was a kind of weakness. "A little," she finally said. Alexander felt a wave of protectiveness he had never experienced before. It was something primal, instinctive, that went far beyond simple pity. It was as if every fiber of his being screamed that this child needed to be cared for, protected, fed. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" he asked, surprised by his own words. "I know a place that makes the best burger in the city." Sophia's eyes widened. "For real? But I don't have any money to pay." "You'd be my guest," Alexander said quickly. "And afterward, well, we could take a walk in the park, if you want, of course." For the first time since he had found her on the sidewalk, Sophia smiled. It was a small, hesitant smile, but it was genuine, and Alexander found he would do anything to see that. "Smile again." "I'd like that a lot," she said, slowly getting up and brushing the dust from her clothes. When Alexander extended his hand to help her, Sophia took it without hesitation. Her little hands were cold and dirty, but Alexander held them with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed. At that moment, walking down the busy street with a strange child, he felt he was embarking on something that would change his life forever. He didn't know how or why yet, But a strange certainty settled in his heart. This meeting was no coincidence. The restaurant Alexander chose was a cozy little diner 3 blocks from his store, known for serving neighborhood families for over 20 years. It wasn't the kind of establishment he normally frequented. His dinners took place in exclusive clubs or Michelin-starred restaurants, but something about this night called for simplicity. Sophia was enchanted by everything. Her eyes scanned the room with a pure curiosity that Alexander had forgotten existed. She watched the families at other tables, the waiters carrying steaming plates, the children laughing and chatting animatedly with their parents. There was a melancholy in her gaze as she focused on the family scenes, but also a genuine fascination. "It's really nice in here," she said, as they sat at a booth near the window. Alexander looked around through Sophia's eyes and discovered she was right. The place had a warm charm he had never noticed before. Soft lighting, old photographs on the walls, the comforting aroma of home-cooked food. It was the kind of atmosphere that invited conversation and closeness, a world away from the formal venues where he usually dined. When the menu arrived, Sophia held it with an almost religious reverence, as if it were a precious object. Alexander noticed she was trying to read, but some words clearly confused her. "Can I help you choose?" he offered gently. Sophia nodded, a little embarrassed. "I can read a little, but some of the words are hard." "Do you go to school?" "Sometimes," she replied vaguely, "when I can get clean and when I'm not too tired." Sophia's casual answer about her spotty education made Alexander realize just how complex the child's situation was. It wasn't just about not having a home. She was being deprived of all the basic things he took for granted: a regular education, consistent meals, a safe place to sleep. They ordered burgers and fries, and Alexander watched with a mixture of joy and sorrow as Sophia savored every bite as if it were the best food in the world. It probably was the best meal she'd had in a very long time. "Sophia," he said during dinner, "tell me what a normal day is like for you." She thought for a moment, thoughtfully chewing a French fry. "Well, I wake up when the sun comes up because it's warmer then. Then I look for a place to wash my face, sometimes in the fountain at the park. After that, I walk around the city looking for places where people are nice and give me a few coins." Alexander listened in silence, trying to imagine a 6-year-old navigating the streets of one of the world's busiest cities alone. And at night. "At night, I find a safe place to sleep. Sometimes I count the stars when I can see them between the buildings, and I imagine what it would be like to have a family." Sophia's simple words touched Alexander in a way he hadn't expected. There was an extraordinary resilience in this small child, an ability to find beauty and hope even in the most difficult circumstances. After dinner, as promised, they walked to Central Park. Though it was already dark, the park still had a few visitors, and the lighting created a magical atmosphere among the trees. Sophia ran to the first playground they found, and Alexander followed, fascinated by her sudden burst of energy. "Mr. Alex, come play with me," she shouted from the top of a slide. Alexander hesitated. When was the last time he had played? When was the last time he had done something for pure pleasure, with no agenda or business objective? "I don't know if he began. "Please," Sophia insisted. "It's more fun when you have someone to play with." Something in the way she said it, the absolute sincerity, the real need for companionship, melted Alexander's last resistances. He climbed onto the playground structure, and for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to be just a man playing with a child. They went down the slide, swung on the swings, and chased each other around the equipment. Alexander heard his own laughter echoing in the park, and was surprised by the sound. When was the last time he had laughed like that, without reservation, without worrying about appearances or protocol? When they finally stopped, breathless and smiling, Alexander looked at Sophia and saw something that made him hold his breath for a moment. She was looking up at him with an expression of pure adoration, as if he were the most wonderful person in the world. "Thank you, Mr. Alex," she said softly. "This was the best day of my life." And Alexander realized with a clarity that startled him that it had been the best day of his life too. The temperature had dropped sharply by the time they left the park. Alexander noticed how Sophia began to shiver, even as she tried to hide it. She crossed her arms over her chest and tried to walk normally, but he could see that every gust of wind made her flinch. The reality of the situation hit him again with full force. In a few hours, he would have to leave this child alone on the cold streets of New York. "Sophia," he said, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk, "where exactly are you planning to sleep tonight?" She looked around, assessing her options with an expertise no child should possess. "There's a building entrance up there that's kind of shielded from the wind. Sometimes the doorman lets me stay until his shift is over." Alexander followed her gaze and saw a small alcove between two commercial buildings. It was a narrow, dirty space, completely unfit for any human being, let alone a 6-year-old child. The image of Sophia huddled in that dark corner, alone and cold, was like a knife to his heart. "What if it rains?" he asked, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. "I just press up against the wall and wait for it to pass," Sophia said with a casualness that broke his heart. Alexander looked up at the sky. Dark clouds were gathering, and he could feel the promise of rain in the air. The thought of leaving Sophia to face a storm alone, without proper shelter, with no one to comfort her if she got scared, became simply unbearable. At that moment, something fundamental shifted inside him. All his carefully constructed rules about maintaining emotional distance, all his defenses against complications in his organized life, all his concerns about reputation and social protocol crumbled before a simple, devastating truth. He could not abandon this child. "Sophia," he said, his voice firmer than he felt, "what if you came to sleep at my house tonight?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "At your house? For real?" "For real. I have plenty of rooms, hot food, and you could take a warm bath." Alexander paused, realizing what he was offering. "Just for tonight," he added quickly, more to himself than to her. Sophia looked at him with an expression that mixed hope and disbelief. But I'm a street kid. I'm dirty and I don't have nice clothes." "Are you sure?" The way she described herself, as if her condition made her less deserving of care and affection, broke something definitively inside Alexander. He knelt down to her eye level and gently held her small shoulders. "Sophia, listen to me very carefully. You are not just a street kid. You are a special, brave and intelligent person, and every person deserves a safe place to sleep, especially when it's cold outside." Tears began to stream down Sophia's dirty face, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Alex. Thank you so much." The taxi ride to Alexander's mansion on the Upper East Side was silent but not uncomfortable. Sophia gazed out the window in fascination, watching the city lights blur past like moving stars. Alexander watched her reflection in the glass and wondered what had happened to him that day. In 24 hours, his carefully controlled life had been turned upside down by a 6-year-old child. When they arrived at the mansion, Sophia stood on the sidewalk, staring up with her mouth open. The 3-story brownstone, with its classic facade and impeccably manicured garden, was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. "You live all alone in this whole house?" she asked in awe. "Yes," Alexander replied, and for the first time he realized how lonely that sounded when said aloud. Inside the house, Sophia's fascination continued. She gently touched the polished wood furniture, admired the paintings on the walls, and looked with reverence at the marble staircase leading to the second floor. Alexander saw his house through Sophia's eyes and realized that for all its beauty and luxury, it had always been cold and empty. "Let's find you some clothes," he said, "and then you can take a warm bath." As he led Sophia up the stairs, Alexander knew he had crossed a line from which there was no return. This was no longer just a matter of helping a child for one night. Something had fundamentally changed between them, and in his heart he already knew that just for tonight had become a promise impossible to keep. For the first time in decades, his immense house did not echo with emptiness. There was life, here hope, the promise that perhaps he was not destined to live alone forever. The next morning brought a surreal transformation to Alexander's routine. For the first time in years, he was awakened not by the electronic alarm that went off at 6 a.m. sharp, but by the soft sound of small footsteps in the hallway and a child's voice trying to whisper but failing completely to keep the volume down. "Mr. Alex, are you awake? I don't want to wake you up, but I don't know how the faucet in the bathroom works." Alexander smiled before he even fully opened his eyes. He had woken up several times during the night just to check if Sophia was okay, if she hadn't run away, if it hadn't all been an elaborate dream. Finding her sleeping peacefully in the guest room each time reassured him in a way he couldn't explain. He got up and found Sophia in the hallway, wearing one of his t-shirts like a nightgown. She had tried to comb her own hair, creating a result that was simultaneously adorable and disastrous. Her eyes shone with an energy he hadn't seen the night before. "Good morning, Sophia. How did you sleep?" "It was the best night of my life," she exclaimed. "The bed is so soft I thought I was floating, and there was no car noise, no wind, nothing, and it was warm the whole time." Alexander felt his chest tighten with emotion, imagining how many nights Sophia had spent in places where noise, cold, and discomfort were constants. "I'm glad you slept well. Let's solve this faucet issue and then have some breakfast, shall we?" Breakfast was another revelation. Alexander normally had a quick black coffee while reading financial reports on his tablet. But with Sophia there, everything changed. She was fascinated by the coffee machine, asked 1,000 questions about how the toaster worked, and insisted on helping make scrambled eggs, even if her help resulted in more mess than efficiency. "Mr. Alex," she said, stirring the eggs with intense concentration, "do you eat alone every morning?" "Yes, usually." "Isn't that sad?" The simple question hit him like a lightning bolt. Why would it be sad? "Because eating alone means nobody asks how you slept, or tells jokes, or shares the last piece of toast with you." Sophia paused. "My mommy used to say that food tastes better when you share it." Alexander stopped stirring his coffee and looked at Sophia. At 6 years old, this child had grasped something about life and relationships that he had lost in his 4 decades on Earth. After breakfast, Alexander realized he had a practical problem. He couldn't take Sophia to the store, but he also couldn't leave her home alone. For the first time in his career, he seriously considered skipping work. "Sophia," he said, "what would you like to do today?" Her eyes lit up. "Can we play again? Yesterday was so much fun." "Of course, but, well, I normally work during the day." "Oh." The disappointment in her voice was palpable. "So, you're going to take me back to the street?" The question cut Alexander like a blade. The casual way Sophia assumed she would be abandoned again revealed just how accustomed she was to rejection and abandonment. "No," he said firmly, surprising himself with the speed of his response. "I'm not taking you back to the street. Ever." Sophia looked at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "But you have to work. Work can wait. Today is more important." And so, for the first time in 20 years, Alexander Whitmore called Mrs. Henderson and told her he wouldn't be coming to the store. He spent the day playing in the garden of his mansion with Sophia, teaching her how to use the swing set he'd had installed years ago but never used, and kicking a ball around on the immaculate lawn that had always been merely ornamental. During a break, while watching Sophia chase butterflies, Alexander called his personal attorney. "Marcus, I need information on adoption. The legal process, necessary documents, estimated timeline." "Adoption? Alexander, you didn't even tell me you were seeing someone seriously." "I'm not. It's a complicated situation. A child who needs help." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this? Adoption is a permanent commitment, especially for a single man. There are a lot of legal hurdles." Alexander looked over at Sophia, who had stopped running and was watching him with an expectant look, as if she knew this conversation was about her. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," he replied. When he ended the call, Sophia approached him shyly. "Mr. Alex, were you talking about me?" Alexander knelt to her level. "Sophia, how would you feel if you could stay here, not just for one night, but forever?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "You mean you want to be my real daddy?" "If you'll have me, yes. I would very much like to be your father." Sophia threw herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. "I do. I really do. Thank you, Daddy." The word daddy echoed in the quiet garden and in Alexander's heart like the most beautiful music he had ever heard. The following days passed like an enchanted dream. Alexander found himself reorganizing his entire routine around Sophia, and, surprisingly, every change felt natural and necessary. His mornings began with shared breakfasts, his afternoons had breaks for playtime, and his evenings ended with bedtime stories, something he had never imagined himself doing. Mrs. Henderson immediately noticed the transformation in her boss when he finally returned to work, bringing Sophia with him. "Mr. Whitmore," she said discreetly, watching Sophia examine a doll display with delight, "I've never seen you look so radiant." It was true. Alexander felt as if a part of him that had been dormant for decades had finally awakened. His business decisions remained sharp, but they now came with a lightness he hadn't experienced since his youth. However, it was that same afternoon that the reality of his new situation began to get complicated. Veronica Sterling, his girlfriend of 2 years, showed up at the store unannounced. Veronica was everything Alexander's social circle considered ideal. Beautiful, sophisticated, from an old money family, and with important connections in New York high society. She entered the store as she always did, with the confidence of someone who knew she was welcome anywhere. She wore a flawless Chanel suit and carried a handbag that cost more than many people earned in months. Her presence always transformed any environment into something more formal and distant. "Alexander, darling," she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek with the carefully calculated social kiss that wouldn't smudge her makeup. "You haven't been returning my calls. I was worried." It was then that she noticed Sophia, who was sitting on the floor near the counter, drawing on a piece of paper Mrs. Henderson had given her. Veronica's expression changed instantly, from affectionate concern to confusion, and then to something close to horror. "Alexander," she said in a low voice, "who is this child? And why is she like that in your store?" Alexander felt a pang in his chest at Veronica's tone. There was disdain in her voice, as if Sophia were an object out of place, a stain in a perfect environment. "Veronica, this is Sophia. Sophia, come meet Veronica." Sophia stood up and approached them shyly. In the past few days, Alexander had gotten her new clothes, but there was still something in her posture, a cautious hesitation that revealed her street origins. "Hi," Sophia said softly, extending her small hand as Alexander had taught her. Veronica looked at the outstretched hand as if it were dangerous. "Alexander, may I speak with you in private?" The tone was polite, but Alexander caught the underlying urgency. He asked Mrs. Henderson to stay with Sophia and followed Veronica to his private office at the back of the store. "What exactly is going on here?" Veronica exploded as soon as the door closed. "Who is that child, and why is she in your store as if she were your daughter?" "Because she is," Alexander said calmly, "or at least she will be soon. I'm in the process of adopting her." The ensuing silence was thick with tension. Veronica stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "You're joking," she said finally. "Alexander, you can't be serious. Adopting a street kid? Have you completely lost your mind?" "Sophia is not a street kid. She's a smart, brave, and loving girl who needed a family." "Alexander, listen to yourself. How long have you known this child? A week? 2? And you've already decided to adopt her?" Veronica began to pace the office. "Do you have any idea how this will affect your reputation? Our reputation? I don't care about reputation when it's a matter of doing the right thing." Veronica stopped pacing and faced him with an expression he had never seen before. It was a mixture of anger, disbelief, and something that looked almost like contempt. "The right thing? Alexander, you're a respected businessman, a member of exclusive clubs, a prominent figure in society, and now you want to throw it all away for a child who probably has problems you can't even imagine? What kind of problems? Trauma, behavioral issues, who knows what kind of diseases she might have picked up living on the streets? And you don't even know anything about her family. There could be a history of crime, drugs, anything." Alexander felt anger rising in his chest. "You're talking about Sophia as if she's a dangerous animal." "I'm talking about reality." "Alexander, you've always been pragmatic, always made decisions based on logic. What happened to you?" "Discovered there's something more important than logic," he answered firmly. "I discovered there's love." Veronica looked at him as if he had gone completely insane. And in that moment, Alexander realized with crystal clarity that the woman in front of him was a complete stranger. How had he spent 2 years of his life with someone who could look at an innocent child and see only problems and inconveniences? The argument in the office had lasted for over an hour, and Alexander could feel the echoes of tension reverberating through the walls. Veronica had tried every possible strategy: appeals to reason, financial arguments, concerns about social standing, even carefully measured tears. But Alexander remained, unshakable, which only intensified her frustration. "Alexander," Veronica said, her voice taking on a tone he recognized as dangerous, "you need to understand the gravity of this situation. Our social circle will not accept this. The club, our friends, business partners, they will all question your judgment." "Let them question it," Alexander replied, glancing through the office window into the store, where he could see Sophia showing her drawings to Mrs. Henderson. "I'm not going to make my life decisions based on what other people think." "But I have to think about it," Veronica snapped. "My family has a reputation to uphold. My mother is the chair of 3 charity boards. My father sits on the board of 2 major banks. They won't understand this." Alexander turned to face her. Veronica, are you actually telling me your family would object to a child in need of help? Don't be naive. Of course they support charity, but there's a difference between making a donation and this. She gestured toward the door, as if Sophia was some kind of aberration. Alexander, you don't even know if this child isn't lying. Street kids learn to manipulate from a young age. How do you know this isn't all an elaborate act? The suggestion that Sophia could be manipulating him hit Alexander like a slap. The idea that anyone could see malice or calculation in that sweet, innocent child revolted him to his core. Enough, he said, his voice low but filled with authority. I won't hear another word against Sophia. Veronica realized she had gone too far, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. So you've chosen. You are actually choosing some random child over me, over us, over everything we've built together. We haven't built anything together, Veronica. We had a convenient social arrangement, not a relationship. The words came out harsher than Alexander had intended, but he realized they were true. For 2 years, he and Veronica had attended the same events, appeared together in society photos, and kept up the appearances their respective circles expected, but there had never been real love, genuine connection, or even a deep interest in one another. Veronica turned pale. How can you say that? 2 years, Alexander, 2 years of my life. And they were 2 pleasant years, but they were never more than that. You know that as well as I do. For a moment, Alexander saw something like genuine vulnerability in Veronica's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a calculating coldness he knew well. Very well, she said, smoothing her skirt and regaining her composure. If this is how you want it, then I'll be very clear about the consequences. What consequences? You have until Monday to resolve this situation. Either you get rid of that child and we go back to normal, or I end our relationship publicly, and I will make sure everyone knows exactly why. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean by that? I mean, I will tell our entire social network that Alexander Whitmore has lost his mind and has become obsessed with a street child. I will suggest that perhaps your motivations aren't as pure as they seem. I will plant seeds of doubt about your mental stability and your true interests. The threat was clear and devastating. In their circles, rumors of that nature could destroy a reputation built over decades. Key clients could cancel contracts, business partners could pull away, and his respected position in society could crumble. You're blackmailing me, Alexander said, incredulous. I'm giving you a choice. A child you've known for 2 weeks, or everything you've built in 40 years. Alexander looked at Veronica and wondered how he had been so blind for so long. The woman before him was capable of cruel threats against an innocent child to get what she wanted. How had he spent 2 years with someone like this? I need time to think, he said. You have until Monday, Veronica repeated, grabbing her handbag. And Alexander, don't underestimate me. I am not bluffing. She walked out of the office with firm steps, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and veiled threats. Alexander was left alone, staring through the window at Sophia, who was now helping Mrs. Henderson arrange a display, completely oblivious to the storm gathering around her. For the first time since deciding to adopt Sophia, Alexander felt fear. Not fear of losing money or social status, but fear that forces beyond his control could tear him away from the daughter his heart had already completely adopted. The weekend passed like an eternity for Alexander. He tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Sophia, but she, with the keen perception children often have, noticed something was different. Daddy, she said on Saturday night as he was reading her a bedtime story, are you sad? Your eyes look different. Alexander stopped reading and looked at her worried little face. Sophia had started calling him Daddy naturally, and every time he heard the word, he felt his heart tighten with emotion and responsibility. "I'm just thinking about some important things," he said, stroking her hair, which was now always clean and shiny. "Are they bad things?" Alexander hesitated. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that there were people in the world who saw her as a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be removed? "Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions," he said finally. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, you will always be important to me." Sophia hugged him tightly. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than I ever thought possible." On Monday morning, Alexander arrived at the store with a sense of purpose. He had spent the entire weekend weighing his options, analyzing every possible consequence, trying to find a way out that would protect both Sophia and his future. But he had reached an unavoidable conclusion. There was no middle ground. Mrs. Henderson immediately noticed his resolution when he walked into the office. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "Miss Sterling has called 3 times this morning. She said she'd be here at noon." Alexander checked the clock. It was 11:45. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to take Sophia out for lunch. There's a conversation I need to have, and I'd rather she not be here for it." 15 minutes later, Veronica entered the store with the military punctuality that characterized all her movements. She was wearing an even more formal suit than on Friday, as if preparing for battle. And perhaps she was. "Alexander," she said, kissing the air near his cheek, "I trust you've used the weekend for reflection." "I have," he replied, guiding her toward the office. "And you've reached the sensible conclusion, I imagine." Alexander closed the door and turned to face her. "I have reached a conclusion, yes, Sophia stays." Veronica's expression shifted instantly from confidence to disbelief. "Alexander, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." "Do you know what this means? Do you know what I'm going to do?" "I know exactly what you're going to do," Alexander said calmly, "and I accept the consequences." Veronica studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt. She found none. "Very well," she said, her voice turning to ice. "You've made your choice, but don't say I didn't warn you." "Veronica," Alexander said as she headed for the door, "there's one thing you don't understand." She turned, perhaps expecting one last attempt at reconciliation. "For years, I've lived my life based on what others expected of me. I built a reputation, accumulated wealth, maintained the right appearances, but I was never truly happy. I never felt whole." Alexander paused. "Sophia taught me there's something more important than reputation or social approval. She taught me what unconditional love is." "Unconditional love?" Veronica scoffed. "Alexander, you've known this child for 3 weeks, and in these 3 weeks, she has given me more joy and purpose than I've had in years. She doesn't care about my money, my social standing, or how many zeros are in my bank account. She loves me simply because I chose to care for her." Veronica shook her head with disdain. "You're living in a fantasy. Wait until reality sets in. Behavioral problems, health issues, trouble in school. Let's see how long this unconditional love lasts. Then I will face every problem with her," Alexander said firmly, "because that's what families do." "Family?" Veronica laughed bitterly. "Alexander, you have no idea what a real family is. You're playing house with a street kid." "You're wrong," Alexander said, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what family is, and I'm not giving it up for anything or anyone." Veronica looked at him with a mixture of anger and something that might have been reluctant respect. You're going to regret this, Alexander. When your reputation is in tatters, when your business starts to suffer, when you realize you've sacrificed everything for a whim, you will regret this. Maybe, Alexander said, but at least I'll regret a choice I made out of love, not out of fear. Veronica left without another word, but Alexander knew this wasn't the end of the battle. It was only the beginning. Veronica's threats materialized with a brutal efficiency that not even Alexander had anticipated. In just 1 week, venomous rumors began to circulate through Manhattan's most exclusive social circles. Whispers in private clubs, conversations that halted when he entered restaurants, speculative glances at social events. The first blow came in the form of a call from Charles Morrison, one of his largest corporate clients and a fellow member of a club he'd belonged to for 15 years. "Alexander," Charles said in an embarrassed tone, "I need to talk to you about our contract for the holiday season." Alexander felt his stomach tighten. Morrison's contract represented nearly 20% of his annual revenue. "Of course, Charles. Is there a problem?" "Well, it's a delicate situation. Some concerns have been raised about your current personal situation. The board is questioning whether it's appropriate for us to maintain our partnership at this time." "What kind of concerns?" Charles coughed uncomfortably. "Alexander, you know how these things work. Perception is reality in our world. And there are rumors. Well, rumors about your motivations regarding this child." The sinister implication in Charles's words made Alexander feel sick. "Charles, are you suggesting that—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Charles cut in quickly, "but others are done, and unfortunately I have to protect my company." When Alexander hung up the phone, his hands were trembling with rage. It wasn't just the financial loss that stung, it was the pure malice behind the insinuation. Veronica had found the cruelest possible weapon, planting doubt about the intentions of a man who had simply chosen to love a child. Over the next week, other clients followed Morrison's lead. Contracts were cancelled under various pretexts, but Alexander knew the real reason. Mrs. Henderson tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but he saw the worry in her eyes as she handed him the cancellation letters. The most devastating blow came on Friday afternoon when 2 social workers from Child Protective Services appeared at the store with an official notice. "Mr. Whitmore," said the older woman, consulting her clipboard, "we've received an anonymous tip alleging that you are keeping a minor in your residence without the proper legal authority." Alexander felt the world spin. "But I'm in the process of a legal adoption. My lawyer is handling all the paperwork." "We understand that, sir," said the younger man, "but until that process is finalized, we have to investigate the situation. It's protocol." Sophia, who had been playing near the counter, sensed the tension and shyly approached Alexander. "Daddy, who are these people?" The older social worker watched the interaction intently. "Is this the child in question?" "This is Sophia," Alexander said, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "And yes, she is under my temporary care while we finalize the adoption." "Mr. Whitmore, I have to inform you that until our investigation is complete, Sophia must be placed in a licensed foster home." The word struck Alexander like a lightning bolt. "No, you can't take her. She's safe with me. She's happy." "Daddy?" Sophia said in a small, frightened voice. "Are they going to take me away?" Alexander knelt and held Sophia's small hands, his eyes filling with tears he fought to hold back. "Sophia, listen to me very carefully. No matter what happens, no matter where you have to stay for a little while, I will fight for you. I will bring you back." "But I don't want to go," she said, beginning to cry. "I want to stay with you. You're my daddy. And I always will be," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Always." This is just for a little while, I promise. The older social worker, clearly moved by the scene, approached gently. Sophia, sweetie, you're just going to stay with a very nice family for a few days while we sort out some papers. It's nothing you did wrong, okay? But Sophia clung to Alexander with all her might, as if she could prevent the inevitable through sheer force of will. Don't let them take me, Daddy. Please. He hugged her as tightly as he dared, feeling his heart shatter into a million pieces. I love you, Sophia, more than anything in the world, and I will come get you, I promise. When they finally managed to separate Sophia from Alexander, her cries of "Daddy" echoed through the store like a lament. Alexander stood frozen in the middle of his luxurious shop, surrounded by expensive toys and perfect displays, feeling more empty and devastated than at any other moment in his life. Mrs. Henderson approached him, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, we'll get her back. We'll fight." "Yes," Alexander said, his voice raw with emotion. "We'll fight, no matter what it costs, no matter how long it takes. I'm not giving up on her." But as he stared at the door through which Sophia had been taken, Alexander wondered if the forces aligned against them were too powerful to overcome. For one terrible moment, he allowed himself to doubt whether love would be enough to conquer the world's cruelty. The 3 days without Sophia were the longest of Alexander's life. He could barely sleep. Eating became a mechanical chore, and work seemed impossible. Mrs. Henderson practically ran the entire store while he dedicated himself fully to fighting for custody of Sophia. Marcus, his lawyer, worked tirelessly, but the news was not encouraging. "Alexander, the anonymous tip has created complications. We not only have to prove you're a suitable adoptive parent, but also that these malicious allegations are baseless. How long will that take?" "Weeks, possibly months, and that's if everything goes smoothly." Alexander felt despair threaten to consume him. The thought of Sophia spending months in foster care, possibly thinking he had abandoned her, was unbearable. It was then that something unexpected happened. On Wednesday morning, a line began to form outside Wonderland Toys. Alexander watched, confused, from his office window as dozens of people gathered on the sidewalk. Mrs. Henderson rushed up the stairs. "Mr. Whitmore, you need to see this." When Alexander came down to the main floor, he found about 50 people outside, parents with children, grandparents, young couples, people of all ages and backgrounds. Many were holding handmade signs. "We want Sophia back," read one. "Love builds families, not money," said another. "Alexander Whitmore, a real hero," proclaimed a third. Mrs. Henderson explained as they watched through the shop window. "It started with some of the regular families who came in last week and noticed Sophia was gone. When they heard what happened, they spread the word. It seems your kindness impressed more people than you realize." A middle-aged man Alexander recognized as a regular customer knocked on the door. "Mr. Whitmore, can I have a word?" Alexander opened the door and was immediately met with a chorus of supportive voices. "Mr. Whitmore," the man said, "I'm Roberto Silva. My daughter bought her first doll here 5 years ago. I've always admired how you treat the children in this store with genuine respect and kindness. When we heard what you did for Sophia," an elderly woman continued, "and how they're trying to punish you for it, we decided to act. No child should be separated from a loving parent because of malicious gossip." A young mother stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, I have a daughter Sophia's age. If someone had helped her the way you helped Sophia, I would be eternally grateful. What they're doing to you both is wrong." The words of support continued for over an hour. Alexander discovered that the story had spread far beyond his immediate social circle. Parents who knew Sophia from the store, neighbors who had witnessed her transformation, even people who had simply heard the story and were outraged by the injustice. More importantly, many of these people knew Sophia personally from the days she had spent at the store. They were able to testify to the social workers about the girl's obvious happiness and well-being when she was with Alexander. "I've never seen a child so radiant," one of the regulars told the social worker who came to investigate the demonstration. Sophia was clearly loved and cared for. Anyone with eyes could see it. The most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a respected child psychologist who had observed Sophia in the store a few days before the separation, offered her professional assessment. "In my 20 years of experience working with traumatized children," she told the investigative team, "I have rarely seen such a positive and rapid transformation. Sophia wasn't just adjusting, well, she was thriving. Separating a child from an environment where she is so clearly flourishing can cause significant psychological harm." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Sophia was fighting her own battle. The foster family was kind, but Sophia refused to eat properly and cried every night, repeating only, "I want my daddy, I want to go home." The case's social worker, Sandra Martinez, had worked with hundreds of children over her career. She knew how to recognize when a child was genuinely distressed by a separation from a loved one versus simply adjusting to a new situation. "This child is not just homesick," she reported in her evaluation. "She is suffering a traumatic separation from a paternal figure to whom she has deeply bonded. The bond between them is clearly genuine and healthy." On the fourth day, Sandra made a decision. She arrived at Alexander's store, accompanied by Sophia, who bolted from the car the moment she saw the familiar storefront. "Daddy!" she cried, running into Alexander's arms as if her life depended on it. Alexander scooped her up and held her, as if he would never let go. Tears streamed down both their faces as they embraced in the middle of the store, surrounded by Mrs. Henderson and a few customers who broke into spontaneous applause. "Mr. Whitmore," Sandra said, watching the reunion, with a smile, "after our full investigation, we have determined that Sophia is in a safe, loving, and suitable environment. The adoption process can proceed as planned." "And the allegations?" Alexander asked, still holding Sophia tightly. "We have determined them to be entirely baseless and clearly malicious. We are closing the case." Alexander looked around his store. His real store, not the business empire he had built, but the place where he had found the love of his life in the form of a 6-year-old girl. He had lost some clients, his reputation in certain circles had been shaken, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable, a real family and a community of people who believed in the power of love over prejudice. "Daddy," Sophia said, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes, "you're not going to let me go away again." "Never again," Alexander promised. "Never again." 6 months after the day Sophia first walked into Wonderland Toys with her crumpled $20 bill, the store had become something entirely different from what Alexander had ever imagined. What was once just a luxury business catering to New York's elite had transformed into a true community hub, where families from all backgrounds felt welcome. Sophia's adoption had been finalized 3 months ago in a simple but deeply emotional courtroom ceremony. Alexander still remembered the way she had squeezed his hand when the judge asked if she wanted him to be her father forever. "He already is," she had replied with a conviction that made the entire courtroom smile. On this particular spring morning, Alexander watched Sophia help a younger child pick out a birthday gift for his sister. The girl's transformation was extraordinary, not just physically, though her hair now shone with health and her clothes were always clean and fitting, but especially in her confidence and natural generosity. "Daddy," Sophia said, approaching him with a shy boy of about 4. "This is Miguel. He wants to buy a present for his sister, but he's a little confused about what to choose." Alexander knelt to Miguel's level. "Hello, Miguel. What kind of things does your sister like to do?" As he helped Miguel find the perfect gift, Alexander reflected on how his own life had changed. Yes, he had lost some important clients due to Veronica's malicious rumors, but he had gained something far more valuable: new customers who came to his store not just for the products, but for the welcoming atmosphere Sophia had helped create. Mrs. Henderson approached with a smile. "Mr. Whitmore, there's a woman here who would like to speak with you." Alexander looked in the direction she indicated and saw a woman in her early 30s watching Sophia with interest. She looked nervous but determined. "Excuse me," the woman said as he approached. "My name is Elena Rossi. I heard about your story with Sophia. I'm a single mother and—" She hesitated, glancing at her young son who was playing near a display case. "I've been facing some hard times recently, and I was wondering if you could give me some advice on how to keep going when everything feels impossible." Alexander smiled with understanding. In recent months, many people had sought out the store not just to buy toys, but to share their stories and seek inspiration. His experience with Sophia had inadvertently become a symbol of hope for others facing family challenges. "Of course," he said. "Why don't we get some coffee and talk?" As he spoke with Elena about the challenges of single parenthood, the fears for the future, and the importance of believing in love, Alexander noticed Sophia watching from a distance. When Elena left, more hopeful and with some practical advice, Sophia came over. "Daddy," she said thoughtfully, "were you helping that lady like you helped me?" "In a different way, yes. Sometimes people just need to know they're not alone." Sophia nodded with a wisdom that sometimes startled Alexander. "It's like when I was on the street and you brought me home. You showed me I wasn't alone." "Exactly. So our store is kind of a place where people can buy hope?" Sophia's question struck him deeply. For his entire career, he had focused on selling luxury products to people who had everything. Now, his store had become something far more meaningful. "You know what, Sophia? I think you're right." Later that evening, as they were closing up the store together, a routine they had developed and which Alexander cherished, Sophia asked a question that caught him by surprise. "Daddy, do you remember the first day I came here?" "Of course I do. How could I ever forget? I said I wanted to buy a daddy." "Yes, you did." Sophia grinned with that smile that still melted Alexander's heart every single day. "I figured out something funny." "What's that?" "I didn't actually buy a daddy. I got a whole family." Alexander stopped arranging the window display and looked at his daughter. "What do you mean?" "Well, I got you as a daddy, and Mrs. Henderson is like a grandma, and all the customers who come here and are nice to me are like a big family. And now there's Elena and her son, who might be coming over for dinner on Sunday." Sophia's perception of how their little family had grown organically moved him deeply. It was true. They had created a network of connections that went far beyond blood ties. "And do you know what the best part is?" Sophia continued. "What?" "You got a family too, because before me, you were all alone, just like I was." Alexander knelt and hugged Sophia, feeling a gratitude that words couldn't express. "You're right, sweetheart. We saved each other." As they walked home, hand in hand, passing the very spot where Sophia had once slept on the sidewalk, Alexander reflected on the extraordinary journey they had traveled. He had started as a wealthy but emotionally empty man, focused only on material success. Sophia had arrived as a desperate child, wanting to buy something she thought was for sale. Together, they had discovered that the most valuable things in life, love, family, purpose, human connection, cannot be bought. They can only be given freely and received with an open heart. The toy store, once just a business, had become a place where dreams came true and where true love could be found by those brave enough to open their hearts. And in fact, Alexander realized, smiling as Sophia swung his hand, she had managed to buy a daddy on that first day, not with money, but with something infinitely more powerful, a pure heart full of unconditional hope and love.